a murderer would be treated in, or any other, what you might call, deleterious person. You were treated just as they were in the prison. And because your jail sentence was indefinite, if you were jailed for being a dissenter, you would probably never leave that prison alive. Now, how did Stalin's prisons mirror his government? Well, for one, they were rigorously managed. The gulags had a hierarchical structure and a hierarchy that was similar to the Soviet government itself, and how it had a top-down structure that was governed by a stringent set of rules, laws, and expectations. And obviously the staffers of the prisons and the prisoners themselves observed these rules and were subject to all of them. Now, the rules of the prison were not enough. The prisoners needed, apparently, at least in the opinion of the Soviet, we'll call it the Soviet Bureau of Prisons, which was the element of the Soviet government that oversaw the prisons, that the prisoners needed more than just macro level instruction and macro level restraints. They ruled that they needed micro level instruction and restraints. So the prisoners themselves, some of them, became deputized, although they didn't know that they were deputized. But the prison, the gulag, deputized certain prisoners and allowed them to form gangs and militias and units that kept the other prisoners under control. Now, some of these, we'll call them incarcerated prison gangs, some of them abused the prisoners and were allowed to abuse them in a number of different ways, violently and psychologically, as a way of making an example out of those prisoners, so the other prisoners in the gulag wouldn't think about trying to escape or fight back. And yes, these gulags were work camps, so the prisoners there, the overwhelming vast majority of them participated in what we might describe today as slave labor. Just as Adolf Hitler's concentration camp units engaged in slave labor, many of them, there were work elements in some parts of the concentration camps. So ultimately, Joseph Stalin's gulags became notorious as a horrific place that you'd never want to go, just as Adolf Hitler's concentration camps became notorious as horrific places you didn't want to go. So what did these camps, these gulags, do at the micro level with respect to controlling the populations of Germany in the West and Russia in the East? Fear and trembling among the general population. You will not only be a productive worker here, but you will do so willingly, and you will do so with a sense of patriotism to your country. Otherwise, we will observe you, we will surveil you, we will warn you, and if you still make a ruckus about how we run this country, we are going to jail you. And we're going to do it in such a way that your family will never see you again. And this is not so much to make your family upset. It's not so much as a way to hurt your community. It's a way of making your family, your community, and indeed the entire population of Russia, the entire population of Germany, we are going to ensure that they understand that we are the ones in control here. We are the ones with access to military resources. We are the ones that run the police stations. We are the ones that operate the silent or secret police units here. We are the ones that investigate crimes. We are the ones in control of the courts. We're in control of the means of production. Our rule determines the trajectory of this country, which by proxy determines the trajectory of your life. Now, we want you to be productive. We want you to be patriotic. We want you to be happy. We want you to be prosperous. We want you to have beautiful families, and we want you to be able to worship your gods so long as it's done in a reasonable fashion, particularly in a way that's not going to undermine our rule. But you are going to do these things within the confines of what we and our researchers have deemed appropriate. If you decide to go against these protocols, you run the risk of never seeing your family again and never enjoying another free day upon this earth. Okay? This that I've just described is the joint mentality. We'll not call it the joint mentality, but the similar mentality that the Nazi Germans and the Soviet Russians had towards the government of populations. The only real difference in ideology came from Soviet Russia. They were very secular at the time. They discouraged and even oppressed churches because, excuse me, I had to clear my throat, because they saw churches as a subversive and nonsensical deviation from common sense. The government of the Soviets saw the idea of invisible beings having sway over us, mortals, who are visible, okay, intangible beings like gods, goddesses, and deities, having moral control over humans who are visible, tangible beings. They saw that to be absurd and obstructive to worker progress. Gang stalking, ladies and gentlemen, mirrors both Adolf Hitler's Schutzstaffel and Joseph Stalin's People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs. Now, I'm going to be the first to say Hitler's Nazi Germany as a fascist construct was sophisticated. They pulled out all the stops, and they left no stone unturned with respect to the macro and micro control of their population. They even had a ministry of propaganda which used various media outlets and productions to cement its governmental policies into the minds of the people. Joseph Stalin's People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs had a similar protocol. However, it was very different in scope, and it didn't appear quite as xenophobic as Hitler's. And mind you, in the 1940s, both Germany and Russia oversaw what could be pretty accurately classified as empires. Hitler's on the west, Russia's on the east. The rest of Europe, the west of Western Europe, was in many respects subject to what happened in Hitler's government, and the rest of Eastern Europe was in many respects subject to the actions of the Soviets. They were two very powerful empires that existed during World War II. Gang stalking in many respects mirrors Hitler's Schutzstaffel and Stalin's People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs. Now how? Because until the 1960s, when the DOJ's COINTELPRO protocol was implemented, the United States had not documented any particular mechanism for controlling its citizens at the micro level. It had a strong system of government at the macro level, with an emphasis on freedom, democracy, and the rule of law and patriotism, based upon a number of precepts that included the United States Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the American Indian War, voters' rights, women's rights, the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade in America, the individual state constitutional rights, individual freedoms and liberties, the Bill of Rights, the right to bear arms, the right to own property. All of these things were sort of innovative political tools that the United States had used from its founding up until World War II to institute sort of a sense of voluntary nationalism. And that's what made the United States in the 1940s in particular appealing to its citizens. Yes, there was a draft. Yes, they knew that they would be going up against what was known then as the Axis powers. And they were essentially told, Uncle Sam needs you. Your government needs you. Your country needs you. If you want this country to progress, if you want to see it move forward, if you want to have generations that are are able to enjoy the same freedoms that you enjoy, join the fight. Because the sovereignty of this country is threatened. A beautiful allegory for why a person should join the army. Who'd ever thought that that same United States that put those beautiful World War II recruitments together would turn around and put the progeny of some of the people who fought in World War II in the gang stalking campaigns? And you know how I know this is the truth? Because my paternal grandfather, my maternal grandfather, and my maternal great uncle were all soldiers during World War II. My maternal great uncle was a master sergeant in World War II, and we have the photographs to prove it, and the historical records to prove it. Their progeny wound up in a gang stalking campaign. Despite all those beautiful allegories of freedom and justice, now, like Hitler's Schutzstaffel and like Joseph Stalin's People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs, the United States has adopted a microsystem of domestic slavery. And mind you, I'm not just talking about African Americans who have ancestors who were involuntary servants for a period of 400 years. I'm talking about anyone, regardless of their racial background, who was thrown into a gang stalking campaign is, in fact, an involuntary ward of the state. Because the state is collecting data on you, the state is using experimentations on you, the state is mobilizing personnel against you, the state is using military industrial technology on you, the state is monitoring you, the state is using your behaviors as evidence of various factual bases for human behaviors. A lot of what happens to a targeted individual is laborious. The very trajectory of your life is a work, an occupation for your federal government, and you're not being paid for your work. The different experiments that are being conducted on you as a targeted individual, they're not paid experiments. You are not being compensated by the state for the human behavior experiment that's being run on you. That's called slave labor. The United States used to jump on China really heavy for allegedly putting its citizens into sweat camps for big American companies and making them work as slaves. The United States used to criticize a lot of countries for that, not just China. They criticized Pakistan for that. They criticized Thailand for that. They criticized Mexico for that. They criticized a lot of countries for that, allegedly holding their citizens as slaves in these sweatshops and forcing them to work long hours for pennies. And the United States was calling that a human rights disaster and saying that the workers of those countries were slaves. That's probably true. They were slaves. But now what the United States is doing, after all that human rights criticism of other countries, is it's putting its own citizens in what we might call a forced labor camp. Not that much different from the ones that Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin put their citizens in. Because my very life is my occupation at this point, because everything I do is being recorded and used for government use, in its vaults, in its human behavior studies, in its social engineering studies, in its micro management, or we'll say micro popular management studies. My life is being used as a module by my country. And yeah, I go to work too. As annoyed as I get, as in many verbal scuffles as I get with these gang stalkers and these thuggish undercovers that keep coming around, you might pay me a salary for all the work I'm doing for the federal government with all this data collection you're doing on me with this open air harassment mechanism. That makes me an involuntary worker. You know, every country in the world has been made slaves out of other cultures. For example, in Europe, in the Dark Ages, the Roman Empire once conquered the entire European continent, and you had the Romans using the Gauls, the Mediterranean Greeks, what we know today to be the French, the progenitors of the French people, and really on down the list as slaves. The Hebrews were slaves in Egypt for a period of time. The Vikings made slaves out of some of the Romans when they finally conquered them. Most people around the world, most nations and cultures around the world have been slaves to other people at some point in that nation's history. It's considered a crime against humanity now, but so is gang stalking. Hitler's Schutzstaffel and Joseph Stalin's NKVD were seen by those governments as necessary at the time to further their political agendas and to further the prosperity of those nations. We know a little bit more about people now than we did in the 1940s, and we know a little bit more about government than we did in the 1940s. So to have a program like gang stalking right now that mirrors in many respects both of those socio-political programs means that we're not moving forward as a country but backwards. And I don't want to see that happen. Thank you for tuning in.